Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Web Marketing Insights podcast from Gulo. I'm Chris Bonney. Have a very special guest today, Dan Hickey from Delcor. Dan, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you, Chris, for the invite today.
Yeah, good to have you. Good to have you. We're going to talk about conversion rate optimization today. And that's not a term you hear a lot in association circles. I know that's something you talk with your clients a lot about, or try to, and bring it up to bring some awareness to it. But we wanted to break it down today. I think you and I were talking outside of this podcast on the phone and saying this might be a really interesting topic to talk about. So we wanted to do that. Before we do that, do you want to just let people know that don't already know who you are, just a little bit about who you are and what you do at Delcor?
Sure. Again, my name is Dan Hickey. I joined Delcor about 2 years ago, and I'm out of our Chicago office. Delcor is based out of Silver Spring, Maryland. Before joining Delcor, I had been in the association space for 15 years and wore various hats throughout those years. Strong digital background, but also did a fair amount of project management, IT director, and some virtual CIO work. And now actually what I'm doing with Delcor is virtual CIO, strategic work, and then IT maturity assessments. Part of that is looking at some of how they're factoring their digital components into their overall technology stack.
Yeah.
So excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, it's right in your wheelhouse. So again, thanks for being a part of it. So conversion rate optimization, or sometimes known, we have to have an acronym, right? If it's associations, we've got to,
have
they're
one.
very
Right.
familiar with acronyms. So we'll call it CRO. That's what the industry likes to call it, CRO. So again, not a term that you hear a lot about, but I think it is moving in a direction where even if people aren't talking about it per se, it's something that I think we're more and more aware of. Maybe we don't know what the label for it is, and it's not the best name for what it is, but that it is what it is. But basically, conversion rate optimization is when you look at a particular web page or a flow of web pages where you want someone to convert on something, some sort of transaction of some kind, whether it's an e-commerce sale, or even something like, hey, give us your email address. What's the flow of things that happen either across pages or maybe even down one page? How many times versus when someone arrives at a page are they submitting that call to action, and how many times are they not? And if we look at that rate, how do we optimize for it, right? I mean, that's more the literal term, is what are we doing to that page or flow of pages to make sure that that conversion rate is continually improving. And examples of conversion rate optimization, the simplest form is that, there are real world examples out there to say, we changed our button for submitting something from red to green, and, our rates went up because green is more of a go color or whatever. There's a lot of different examples, and we can talk about sort of what those are, but just for the sort of the layman's terms, it's really changing or enhancing elements of the flow of getting someone to do something on your website, perpetually looking at those and optimizing whatever it might be. And we'll talk about what those elements are here in a minute. So that's really what conversion rate optimization is. And what for an association, and chime in here, for me, it feels like there's things like event registration, and there's also some, obviously member renewals are kinds of
Membership
things that
joins, right.
membership joins. But I'm curious to hear from your perspective, Dan, when you talk to your clients about conversion rate optimization, do you call it that? How do you intro that? What's the response when you talk about it? What do you think some of the basics are for associations to think about, around this?
Sure. In terms of kind of the acknowledgement of the term, definitely not always, but depends. It seems to be more acknowledged, when meeting with marketing teams. I think marketing folks are much more dialed into that term, or else some, as you mentioned, some kind of concept. But it is kind of a focus in terms of at the end of the day, what do we want our end users to do? And make it a really clear action, an actionable item that you want your end user to take place. When working, with other departments, you mentioned, membership renewal, membership application, membership join, registration, certification.
Yeah.
Really, when we're talking about looking at a lot of this, you hear some of, you meet with our clients, they talk about kind of the user experience. They always kind of go back to that. They think that a lot of their experiences that their members or constituents have to go through is kind of a poor or weak user experience. And so you mentioned layman's terms. That's kind of how we try to talk to them about and kind of even break it down. So if you look at like the membership join process, one thing we do see quite often is just that how many steps does a member to a prospect need to jump through to join your organization? And it varies. Some groups we work with have a more simplistic approach, and others are very complicated. They have, at the high end, I've seen a client have 35 steps that that the end user needs to go through. And I know there's some frustration with with the website or their AMS and its inability to kind of provide that user experience. But try to push back a little bit on that and say, well, do you really need to capture all that information? Do you really need to make them go through all of those steps to join? And it has varying degrees of success. And the good news is I think a lot of more organizations are becoming much more acutely attuned to it. They know that it's an area that they need help on, and that it's frustrating. Whereas even just 5-10 years ago, I'd say more like 10-15 years ago, I think there was just an understanding, well, that's what, if you're an association and you're a member, you're joining, is kind of, well, that's just kind of what you have to go through. But I think the digital space has changed so much, and everything with digital transformation over the last 10 years has made life so much easier to transact online, that it's kind of catching up. That you can't just say, well, our members they're fine going through 10 different steps to join us. That's not the case, especially with younger. I hate saying that, but with younger members too that are trying to get them engaged with your organization. You really want to make things as simple as possible. So we kind of start there, like looking at the business rules and what are absolutely is critical. That again, I'm focusing on the join process, but using as an example, what absolutely is critical to have that person, that end user, transact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a good point about the younger membership, because that's the future of any organization, whether it's a user group, trade, professional society. That's part of this factor, right? That's what we want to achieve. And I think thinking about how we're converting on membership is a perfect example of thinking about how to do this differently. And so yes, 35 steps, 38 fields to fill out is too much for most people, especially someone that's younger. They're not as patient, they're not understanding why that's all important. But I do think another aspect to tie in is that one way to understand how to better optimize the things that you're trying to get conversion on is what's an equivalent to what they might be doing out there in the real world as well. It might not be in the association world, but everything on the web is geared around your audience. Okay, right? If we're not thinking about our audience first, we've already kind of lost a thread. But what does our audience, the younger members, let's just say, what are they used to in their life, right? What is their expectation for what they want to be able to do? And any sort of, friction in the join process, I think is definitely a lost opportunity if we're talking about getting into younger membership for sure. Now, the elements of conversion rate optimization. So here's something I want to actually back up and maybe talk about is,
sure.
Can you talk about when it comes to AMSs, okay? And regardless of, the organization's mindset around how many fields of information they need to see, what do you think the temperature is of folks with how AMSs are working for them in those processes? And is there something that AMSs could be doing for their clients around conversion rate optimization? How do folks like you at Delcor as a consultant, fit into that equation? Is it a strategy issue? Is it a tool issue, right? Is it the application itself isn't flexible? Is it a mindset issue? Where do you see, if I'm saying, hey, I'm an association, I love this idea, but, what's the buts that we're going to hear out there in the world around those elements?
Yeah, it's a really important concept to address early on. So in relation to the AMS, it really depends. Again, I keep kind of harping on the membership join process or using that as an example. Looking at, some organizations do have a fairly simple join process. And so therefore, that membership join process, leveraging your AMS capabilities there, it's kind of public facing interfaces to leverage that may work. But other times, again, for those more complex processes, there are a lot of challenges to making kind of a seamless user experience. And one thing I would just recommend, if you want one takeaway from this, is really leveraging an outside vendor such as you guys, plug for it, but a digital agency to help that specializes in usability and user experience, because not all of them, but most of the AMS vendors just don't have that expertise in terms of when you're kind of building those workflows or those the different designs in terms of what your join process may look like, your event registration. There are nuances, as you mentioned, with this that I think you're going to get into momentarily in a little more detail, that really help, that do have a big impact on the conversion rates. And so how are you collecting that data? What's necessary to flow? Is obviously responsive if needed. Most sites are now. But really making sure you have that oversight from a kind of a UX expert to make sure that process is as seamless as possible. And my experience is that gets continually overlooked. And again, there are associations that do focus. Many don't. And just kind of configure their e-commerce processes up and then kind of get frustrated that they aren't as optimal as they would like. And so that's what I actually wrote a blog about this a couple of months ago, just how important it is to factor that in, whether you're doing an implementation to make sure that you are factoring usability testing and getting actual user feedback, but also making sure that like wireframing in some component is factored into that process too. And if you're already staying with your current system, when you go to revisit those same principles, do some lightweight usability, perhaps get a third-party vendor that does specialize in usability best practices to make sure that is a seamless experience, because all the way end to end, from that from when you access the homepage or however you're going to access the site, whatever the entry point is, all the way through the order receipt page, which sometimes there's follow-up tasks or follow-up steps that are needed from there. So really end to end, making sure that is an easy, seamless, clear experience for the end user.
Yeah, and you brought up something that I want to touch on real quick too, is reporting or testing, right? I think there's this transitional point as someone that works on websites mostly, that you're bringing a user down a path, and then there's a cutover, usually maybe through single sign-on when they head over to the AMS sides of things, and we need to track them there. AMSs do a pretty good job of tracking the activity and what's happening during that flow, but it's a matter of matching that up with what's happening on the web. And I think a lot of times what we see is that people, organizations, I think everyone has Google Analytics, on their site.
In some capacity, right.
On some capacity, but there's things like Google Tag Manager, there's things like Google Optimize, there's a bunch of other tools that I would say, go out there and take a look at those and see what kind of things that you can do to help understand how to test and how to report on the things that are happening on your website. Really simply, within Google Analytics, there's the goal tracking where you can set up the path that you think people should be following or you'd like them to follow across your website, and it tracks and gives you a thumbs up or a point when you actually get someone to follow that goal. And that's what we're talking about. That's a conversion, that's a path. And as you're building a website just in general, we're saying this is about knowing who your audience is, and then knowing why they're coming to your site. What are they trying to do? And then let's formulate your site in a way that allows them to walk through that path, right? And then we'll see along the way where we lose people. We see where we've lost them. We go back and take a look at it and optimize it. And A/B testing is another thing that we can do, whether it's around copy or button colors or what have you. There's tools out there to do that. Google Optimize, Optimizely, others. And I think, though, I want to get your feedback on this. What we try to say is testing is super important on any level. But I think people imagine like lab coats and strings of, computers, and people are hunched over and they're looking, and there's so many easy ways now to do testing, right? A/B, whatever it is, usability testing. So what kind of if you had something to say about that, or how, when you talk to folks, how they react to that, or, where you think people's heads should be at around testing, what would you say about that?
Yeah, well, also you're right. And that's a great point. I think even when we have recommendations, so Delcor does an IT maturity model assessment in which, when we go in there and there's different quadrants that we look at their business, infrastructure, data, technology management, and then digital being one of them. And on that digital quadrant, I like having recommendations about regarding usability testing. And you're right. You said the lab codes, but that or just dollar signs too. They're concerned about it's going to cost me tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah, they think it's going to be some really high tech, expensive endeavor, and it doesn't need to be. I mean, there are various tools out there that really, especially now that everyone's getting more comfortable with Zoom and
Teams, great point.
Really can just schedule this online, and you can, if you want to, engage with a third party, vendors such as yourselves, you can, or else you can do some lightweight testing yourselves, maybe from your marketing team that can just reach out to some of your key members and just take, 10, 15 minutes of their time and walk through some of those processes and get feedback. And you really just need a handful of participants seeing trends. I did this years ago, even before I joined Delcor. So really, it was a really cool experience. We had, not even that many, really, about 5 steps to join with a particular association. And one of them was going through the chapter process. A lot of associations have chapters. And it's kind of eye-opening to us is when we went through this. A lot of the newer members had no idea what a chapter was. They'd pick their state, and we'd ask them, well, why you live in Illinois or Chicago? Why are you picking Illinois? And they're like, well, that's just where I live. They're like, well, do you even know what a chapter is? And it was eye-opening that they didn't, and they didn't understand the benefit. Why am I being forced to even pick a chapter? The organization subsequently kind of removed the requirement for that. That's a different story. But when we presented those findings to the senior leadership team, I think they were stunned that, something as basic that everyone just takes for granted, something as basic as that. So we did redesign and simplify the whole join process, and we did see an increase in conversions. But interesting story. Something like that was tangible proof that we can kind of bring back and say, hey, this is a problem for us. They're not understanding the benefit.
And it was simple testing. Didn't take you. You didn't have to talk to 100 people to figure that out. Right. And it really wasn't that expensive, but it made a huge impact. And strategically made a big impact. And we're even, we felt the roles with the chapters are. So it's just one example of something that, again, was a little more lightweight, but did have an impact on the organization. Another thing too with usability testing is sometimes talk about completely re-architecting or redesigning the whole page. And I've seen sometimes it's literally shifting a button. You mentioned the button before, making kind of from red to green or something like that. I've seen just some more subtle changes like that can pay big dividends. The subtle changes too that maybe you don't think. It's kind of hard because a lot of, especially on the marketing side, these folks are looking. They're working in the content management system. They're working with these pages day out, and they kind of take it for granted. Some of these processes, and they don't think through that. For a brand new user or someone that maybe comes to your site a year, things that you may, components that you may feel make perfect sense aren't to an end user. So it all comes back to, you mentioned the AMS too. And so you hear that a lot too. We want our AMS to be more user-friendly or greater usability. Which of course is important, but you need to have tangible steps to then improve those interfaces. You got to look in, like, what are the interfaces and transactions that are absolutely most critical to the business? And then, again, I keep going back to like the business rules and what can you do to simplify those and then track those changes you make and make sure that those improvements are made. Well, you raise a lot of good points there. And one of the things too, and I don't think this is exclusive to associations necessarily, but thinking in our own terms. We've been doing this, like you said, for so long. We have the jargon. We know what a chapter is. We know what this is. We know what advocacy means. We're talking about this all day long, and folks outside don't. So I think there is just an overall good lesson in there that says we're not our members, even if we feel like we are. We're not. And creating personas and scenarios and having, like you said, someone like whether it's Gulo, Delcor, or someone else helping you understand who that audience is and giving you that outsider perspective that, wow, we don't know what chapters are either. So let's maybe think about what that experience might look like. That's one of the benefits too, I think, from bringing people outside. But I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of CRO. So I think we've made a pretty compelling case that it's something we should think about. It's going to enhance your business. It's a worthy investment to think about how to test and optimize. But what do we want to do, and how could we do it if we wanted to do it ourselves, or what elements are we looking at? I want to talk first about just overall user experience and design and that kind of thing. And I know you have some thoughts about, what that should be for associations just on a bigger scale, but do you want to just talk about that for a minute, just how you feel design impacts it and how associations should be thinking about design, like, just in general?
Absolutely. A couple thoughts on that. You mentioned audience. I mean, first and foremost, that's it. Maybe it sounds like I'm stating the obvious, but really understanding your audience. Audiences are most important. But even with that said, you have to prioritize. You need to be a little disciplined on that. One problem I've seen on various, website engagements with associations, there is a desire to kind of please everyone and cater to all various audiences, but you do need to kind of hone in on who are the most critical, audiences that are most impactful to your business. The other thing I would also say in terms of your approach to it is think of it holistically too. There are, again, a number of good web vendors that do this. A lot of the focus that we see is just on your website. So we're wireframes, and we're going to, you look at the design palette and, all the design elements, but the focus always tends to be solely on just their the website, the content management portion of their digital portfolio, when really you're interacting with, AMS components, LMS components, your online community, various other entities, digital property, abstract submission, systems. And one issue, this is something we see quite often, is there is no holistic overview of all this. I mean, at the end of the day, an end user doesn't care what the platform is. They want to make sure that, they came to their site for whatever reason. They just want to do what they need to do, and they'd rather do it fairly quickly too. So that's another key takeaway, is really making sure that, and I get that there's budget implications and resource implications, but really looking at all of your digital assets holistically in terms of that, from that user experience. Because as too, we see can be kind of jarring experience when you're kind of bopping around the different platforms and with varying degrees of, ease of use. So again, just look at it more holistically. I mean, of course, it's important on the main website, but take that same lens or that same perspective with your other digital properties and assets too.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And I think, and just to, I think so design is a part of this, right? If someone's arriving at your site, whatever page it may be, and they're disoriented, they don't know what it's about, that's at the highest level. Like, we get not good, and how do we optimize for that? Well, we want to make sure that people see themselves when they arrive at your site, right? It doesn't have to be a person that looks like them. It just has to be like, these are my people. I understand. So many websites have just, on a homepage especially, you see the acronym without a lot of explanation about what it is. And then they just go into it as if everyone arriving just assumes they know what your organization is. And so, I think, that disorientation of folks, is a real simple example of how you can optimize your homepage to say, wait a minute, let's not assume everyone knows and jump right into our jargon and our news and everything.
Absolutely. Yeah.
A point to do that. And want to take this to the next level, because we understand people are arriving at our homepage as an association. How do they get there? A lot of different ways. We're sending emails to people and directing them to certain areas of our website, more specific landing pages per se. We're talking to associations more and more and more about search engine optimization and how just because your acronym comes up, if they search it and you're number one, it goes way beyond that. And how can search engine optimization really improve what you do? A lot of times we hear people say, well, we don't need search engine optimization because we're not trying to get people to find us online so they join. A lot of healthcare organizations, they know every doctor type and every potential member in the industry. They don't need them. A doctor's not going to Google and go, oh, I didn't know this organization existed. Maybe I should join. right? That isn't what it's about as much as creating authority in your industry. Perhaps we talk a lot about that. And just following SEO best practices as a rule not only makes Google like your pages more, but it's better web practice in general. It makes you think about how you're putting a website and web page together that then is a better ultimate user experience in and of itself. So thinking about this and saying, we're going to optimize our pages. We want people to show up on this page, event reg page, and we were using search engine optimization because we've got a competitive commercial event that's competing with our nonprofit association event. That happens. So we want to be in the game from a search engine optimization perspective and make sure our event is bubbling up. Well, that seems like a real reasonable case, right? So, okay, so now we're going to use SEO to drive people to the page. Okay, now we're on the page and we need people, like we said, the design needs to be quality. It needs to have a user experience that they're familiar with that speaks to the audience. Now we want them to convert on, onto that page. So a big part of what happens there is how compelling are the words and what's the layout of the sections of that page. And I think what people, some marketers are very in tune with this, is that there needs to be a flow down that page that's leading to that call to action. And there's certain formulas even that can be a part of that you can look up. There's a whole bunch of them. One that we talk to our clients a lot about is AIDA, AIDA, which is awareness, interest, desire, action. That can be a sales funnel. It can be a whole bunch of things, but it can also be components of a landing page to say, you ended up at this page because you were interested in, X. Here's why that makes a lot of sense. Here's what other people in the industry are saying about it. Here's proof that this is the event for you, right? Why don't you register? As opposed to just saying, well, if we put the register button up top as high as possible so they see it as soon as they're more inclined to do it, right? So there's just, components on the page and layout of the page is a huge part of it. It's one thing to be able to say, we successfully brought people through search engine optimization to this page. That's half the battle. The other part of the battle, right, is to get them to hit that CTA. And, copy as well. The words on the page, I think, are a big part of what we do. If you want someone to sign up for your newsletter, this is an example that I think resonates. Just saying sign up for our newsletter and then having the box that says submit is likely not going to convert as high as join 71,000 other people in our industry that find our tips amazing each and every month, guaranteed to, grow your business.
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
Give me your email.
Find the tips to help you grow your profession. Right.
It seems like a very small price to pay suddenly to get in on what a big thing is. So it's one thing to say, let's drive people to a page. It's another thing to say, let's get it formatted in a way that makes sense. It's another part to say, let's get the design right. But if we're not compelling in our copy, people have better things to do, right? We've taken their attention away, and now how are we going to take it the one step further? In your mind, how should folks, what would a next step be? Based on the things we've talked about for today, people are saying, look, this CRO thing makes sense. I know a new term. I know a new acronym. Dan and Chris made some sense. This is something I want to look into. What would you say to somebody as far as what their next steps should be, what they should be, what's the low hanging fruit for them to sort of get on the CRO wagon?
I would say at the very least, really have an inventory of those key transactions and be strategic in that and think about what are any of those places on the website that are absolutely critical to the business. Because you have to start somewhere. And so again, whether it's event registration, the whole thing that we've seen with, with COVID-19 is that in the association space, a lot of revenue is dependent on event registrations, right? Or meeting revenue. And so, there's been changes in terms of going from in-person to virtual meetings, but in understanding kind of what your revenue model is and what's most important to you, really making sure that those key areas of transactions are an area of focus. From there, I'd say, yeah, making sure that those processes, really revisiting any kind of business processes you have around those interfaces, revisit those. And if you need to, again, bring in a third-party designer to help with that. But I think a lot of this can even be done in-house too, and just revisiting those and seeing how can you simplify that as much as possible. The other takeaway with that, I see this a lot with associations, is they're trying to piggyback on those processes to, capture as much data as possible during that, because they know, well, it's our one time in renewal to capture all that demographic data, so we're going to make you jump through 7 hoops, 7 pages of demographics to collect that, but you're burdening your end user. So again, focus on that, and really, it kind of then becomes a little bit of somewhat of a data governance exercise too, and like really look at every field of data that you're collecting. Is it absolutely critical for that process, yes or no? So again, inventory the key processes, and then even within there, look at the data you're collecting with any of those processes to make sure it's absolutely necessary. You're doing something with that data if you are collecting it, but try to simplify as much as possible. If you can do some lightweight usability around those transactions, try doing that too. Again, now that we're, everyone's kind of gotten more comfortable with Zoom, and again, whether Teams, go to webinar, whatever you may go to meeting, whatever you want to use, some tool to go out and actually just ping some of your key members and get some feedback on that. So I'd say just, again, low-hanging fruit, things like that you can do. You talked about the copy, and that's really important too. It does touch on another area we see as kind of problematic is some of the more mature organizations have a pretty solid content strategy, but some of the smaller mid-size groups that we work with don't. And you're right, desire to get people to the website, but once they get there, what then, right? So everything you just mentioned is important too. So again, just focus. Like, you can't please everyone, but focus on the key transaction pages or processes, and then also those key pages that have make sure that call to action is very distinct, and making sure that the copy on those pages, as you just mentioned, revisit those. And if you can't, you don't have the expertise or bandwidth in-house, then engage someone with, such as Gulo, to help you with that and tighten those up. I think you can do small efforts can have a big effect on the organization. So I'd say start there.
Yeah, well, those are great words to close on, honestly, because I think a lot of these things can seem daunting. People hear SEO and it feels a little daunting because I don't even know what it means or how to do it. Now you're telling me I got to do CRO after the SEO, all of this testing and A/B testing after the CRO and the SEO, and like, it feels like a little much, especially if you're not a marketing person. Maybe you're in IT and your website's under your umbrella. That happens a little bit still, and we get it. But I think that's a great takeaway, Dan, is to say you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to be a master at it, and it doesn't have to be wildly successful, and it also doesn't have to be expensive. It can just be something like taking what we're talking about here in this podcast, take it to heart, think about it, do a little research. I know you or I would be happy to talk to somebody for 15 minutes to get them off the ground and go where they need to go to do
absolutely.
it. That's just, helping people get where they need to go. But just start, and then you'll learn as you go. Don't be, don't have it be so daunting that you don't start to do it. And the minute you do something, the simplest, smallest change, it could be the wording on a button could change everything. And imagine the hero you become by making and trying a simple change like that. So definitely worth the investment and the learning on that. So Dan, listen, I think we could talk for 2 more hours on this because it's a really fascinating topic. And I think, though, this was a great way to kind of get the word out, let people know what it is, let them know how important it is. You come with a great deal of experience, obviously, from talking with folks on this. And maybe, next year we'll follow up and do another webinar, and or a podcast, and we'll see where everybody is. But we really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate it.
Oh, good. And thanks to everyone for listening today. We really appreciate it. From Gulo here. Next time, maybe I'll have Zach with me again. We look forward to having Dan back again real soon, but it is the Web Marketing Insights podcast from Gulo Solutions. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to subscribe below. If you're listening to us any over the podcast platforms, we'd love to hear any comments or ratings that you might have. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.